Good morning. How is everyone?
Great.
This is Friday in the rain, only in Cleveland would you get this much excitement. It's really, really good to be here. How many of you in the audience have been working in this work in Cleveland for more than 25 years? So I will say, I think I have to move away from that. I will say that we at Living Cities and our predecessor, which was the National Community Development Initiative, have been in Cleveland for more than 25 years. And so I'm actually excited to be here because I have a bit of a perspective on Cleveland. And I've always viewed it as this incredibly tough, gritty place that essentially did what it had to do to move forward. And in many ways, from my days in the 90s, I spent a lot of time here when I was at Enterprise. And I always thought that you were ahead of the nation in so many ways. And sometimes when you are doing the work, you don't quite get that, especially when it's so freaking hard. And so some of those things are, so for example, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, it was an intermediary before intermediaries were cool. So it started in 1988, and we at Living Cities with the National Community Development Initiative, we helped bring intermediaries to 23 cities, but that was not until 1991, 1992. So you guys were already here sort of showing how it has to work. And you had Village Capital, which was a CDFI before there were CDFIs. So the CDFI fund was created in 1994 by Congress, which is how you actually, the term was coined. But Village Capital was actually created in 1992. The other is Cleveland Housing Network. I remember the first time that I came out here and I met the Cleveland Housing Network. That was before Rob was at the Cleveland Housing Network. How's it possible? But the idea that there was going to be this organization that was not only going to do its own work, but was going to help other organizations around the city, kind of shared operations, shared practice, still a good idea, still not done enough around the country. And then, of course, there's your people. So some of the people that I've long admired, this woman right here, who doesn't know, India Pierce Lee. If you have any kind of radar and you're in a place and you're like, where is there trouble? It always pulls you to India Pierce Lee. And then you have this guy here. I mean, who has driven more change than Mark? And then this guy here. I mean, you guys are so used to these people, but these are iconic legends in this work that have impact beyond Cleveland. And I also think, Rob, I was saying this to Rob earlier, the fact, like what Rob is doing now, actually leaving while he's still alive, is actually a really big deal in this world. Because in many ways, you know, he's been doing, like many of you, have been doing such an amazing job. Why would you leave? And the bottom line is we all, if we want to have a transition, if we want to actually help the next generation take over and move the work, that's what you have to do. And I think it's an amazingly brave and important thing to do, Rob. So thank you. And then there's this guy. So like, who in the room hasn't gotten money from Bob Jeckway? And if you haven't got your money from him, raise your hand. Okay, that says a lot, right? But we all know that it's not just the money. It's that, I don't know if Bob is here, because I can't see anything from the stage. There's this light shining right on me. But if he's not, I'm actually annoyed. But the thing about Bob is he's also way beyond Cleveland, an important fixture in Cleveland. Those of us who've been doing work around the country know Bob and rely on Bob and have relied on Bob for like not only what's happening in Cleveland, but where does he think the work has to go. So that is quite a lineage. And when you're living it, what do they say? A fish doesn't know it's in water. right? You don't even know what you have, and you have some amazing things. And so the other thing that I think is amazing, and you're continuing to push, and Joel talked about it a little bit, but it's your year of awareness. And so the bottom line is, and then you have the redlining exhibit back there, but the bottom line is, for way too long, white people like me, who believed that we were doing really good work and helping communities do really good work, have done this work with rose-colored glasses on and not really understanding that, in fact, the root of the causes of so much of the disparities that we're trying to address is racism. And this idea that you all have adopted or embraced this idea of a year of awareness, and that you've had more than 2,400 people to be able to do that training, to be able to understand the groundwater training for those of you. So how many have done that? I didn't quite see. So that's fantastic. It's this idea not just that you are, so racial equity competencies are competencies just like competencies you need to run a spreadsheet. They are skills that you have to build, and they actually allow you to see things you didn't otherwise see. And the fact that you have 2,400, at least 2,400 people whose names that you know who did this and are committed to it, made a public commitment to it, over 600 organizations. I was in Seattle last week or sometime recently, and I was talking about you and what you've done, and they're like, do you mean 200 people? And I was like, no, 2,400 people. And so you really are trailblazing where this work has to go, and that's part of what I want to talk about this morning. And you're already way down the road, or at least the first steps in getting there. New Orleans actually is about halfway towards where you are. They're about 1,200 local leaders. And what was exciting about in New Orleans, where it was in the first class, the first couple classes, then Mayor Mitch Landrieu and Walter Isaacson, who is like the favored son of New Orleans. If you all know Walter, he wrote the biography of Einstein and Steve Jobs, and he was at Aspen. And so once you got Mitch and Walter to go through that program, pretty much everybody else now says it's that they need to go through it. And that really is one of the key things about this work, is that by you all going through that, not only are you building your competencies, but you're normalizing what's expected of the people around you, whether it's nonprofits, for-profits, or otherwise. And so when I don't know, this is what they asked me to talk about, but once I'm on the stage, I can talk about whatever the hell I want. and sorry, Nina, wherever you are. She did do a good job, but she can't control the speaker. And so what I really wanted to talk about was, you have this incredible rich history, you have these amazing assets, and you're actually already showing the way on where we have to go in the future, so what's next? And that's what I want to talk about. And what I think the next is really, how do you define what the next generation of, this is what I'm going to say, and how do you do it in the incredibly toxic environment in which we work? Right, and I will say my staff calls me a frustratingly optimistic, and I will say it's been really hard to stay frustratingly optimistic or optimistic at all. And it's not just because of the president, it's because of what the president has unleashed and seemed to have validated, and the percentage of Americans who actually wanted to be unleashed and validated. That's the part that's hard to reconcile. That said, that's the nation we live in currently. And we have, so I have to move off that slide quickly. But it is a reality that underlies our celebration here this morning. And the question is, so what's the next generation of community development? How do you build upon what you've already done? How do you build upon the people and the assets that you have here? And how do you build upon that year of awareness and this reality that race has to be much more clear and articulate in the work that we do? And so I think it's three things. I think the next generation of community development is really made up of three things. And as my staff will tell you, I always have three things, but each thing has like 9 things in it. So you're not going to be able to take notes very well. But the first one is that we actually have to put race in the center of our organization. And I want to talk specifically about the organization. Because this is something that I learned really, really well. And so some of you may have heard this story before about how Living Cities has radically changed the way that we do our work. But the way that we do our work was changed from the inside out. And I really do believe that step one of the next generation is all of us changing the organizations that we control and influence from the inside out to put race at the center. And ours started because about 6-7 years ago when Trayvon Martin was killed, one of my most valued, beloved, respected staffers came up to me and she said, we know each other well, we trust each other, and I'm going to tell you that me and the other people of color, I've always had a diverse staff everywhere I worked, but it wasn't an equitable staff. And so the diverse staff said, so Trayvon Martin was just killed. When we look at our work, we don't see race at all in the work that we do. When we're in the office, we don't feel like we can even talk about race. And how could we be actually about, now we say, closing the racial gaps in income and wealth, if it's invisible, if it's race neutral? And so my reaction, initially I didn't say it to her face, but was, who the hell are you? To tell me this. I've been doing this 25 years, and I'm quote unquote successful at it. And then I said to myself, okay, these are 8 people who I trust, and they're my senior staff, they're my management team, and are they right? Are all of them right, as the 8 people right, or am I right? And it was pretty obvious they were right and I wasn't. And so the question then is, so what do you do about it? And what we realized was we had to start from the inside and realize that there were competencies that we as staff had to build. I won't talk about, well, I'll get to it sooner or later, but this was really important to us. So all of us think that if we are working on programs and in communities, and maybe we're even talking about race in the work that we're doing, because like the part of the problem is we just don't even talk about race. Because in large part, it makes white people uncomfortable. People of color talk about it all the time because they have to live in it, right? And so the first part is, if you're going to talk about it and you're going to say, what are the values that have to do with race? But ideally, everybody starts here, and most people, including most of philanthropy, I will say, who pays my bills, they'll fund programs, they'll fund training, they'll fund mentoring, but they won't get to here, which is, well, how does it change your theory of change in your organization? What does your vision and your mission statement say? How has your board been trained on racial competencies? Because what we've learned is by doing, so this is my favorite slide. This is like, I always say, this was me. I was born in the 50s. I actually watched, anybody know what this is? Yeah, this is Leave It to Beaver, right? It's like the perfect white American family. And it's like I grew up my whole life like with rose-colored glasses when like this was happening all around me. And the bottom line is, from doing this training, what we realized was this, is that there's a lot you have to unlearn as a person. Forget whatever role you play in your organization. There's a lot you have to unlearn. About American history and about race's role in American history and how actually race is a construct, an important American construct that was built in large part to sustain slavery. How can you actually have people being owned and worked to death unless they're a lesser being? And so we have to unlearn that stuff. And in the training, for those of you who've gone through, some of the most powerful stuff they talk about is that like we're largely past that racism is a bunch of individual acts of meanness, right? There's still mean people, let's be clear. But most of what we're talking about is ending structural and institutional racism that's been around from 1400, when the first people were brought here and sold as slaves. And so as a person, you have to unlearn a ton. And then once you unlearn that and you can see things that you didn't see before, you say, how do I change my role? And so for me, it was as the head of Living Cities. For you, it doesn't matter what role you have. Once you see that, you say, in that role, what can I do to begin to dismantle the racism that I see? That I see in my family, that I see in my neighborhood, that I see in my government, and I see in my company. And in that role, how do I actually go into those systems and dismantle it in the systems? And that this is not about, okay, well, now I'm a better person because I now know this. Because honestly, in our work, who cares? Right? We're about change. We're about justice. And so that means, how does it change your role? And if you went through that year of awareness and that training, and it hasn't changed your role in how you show up in your role, you've got a lot more training to do. And in fact, it's a lifelong training. But if it hasn't changed your role, that's number one. When you walk out today, start to think about how do I change my role? And then what impact can I have on the system? But the most important thing is you have to start from the inside out. One of the things I've learned, this is my 4th national organization that I've run. And my wife would say I can't keep a job, and she's probably right. But what's interesting is, what I've learned is that if you can't do in your own organization what you want the people and the organizations outside to do, it's pretty clear they're never going to do it because it's too hard. And so if you don't start from the inside out and you don't do all of the really tough work internally, so what does it mean? Let me tell you what it's meant for us. Is that just in my head? So what it's meant for us is it's actually made us challenge power, because ultimately this is about power. And as long as especially if it's the white men have all the power and they don't share it, we're going to continue to get the same results. So one of the things we did is we actually distributed the power. I gave up power. We have a management team, and that management team makes the critical decisions about how we spend our money, what we prioritize to do. We actually had all our staff go through training. They have to go through that 2-day training within 90 days of being hired. As just a baseline of what they do. But we also actually have ongoing training. In fact, the hardest part about doing this in your organization is creating the environment where it is normalized, where people can come into work and they can talk about race and they can challenge you. You can have a whole bunch of really uncomfortable conversations, and that people have the competencies to do that. And then it goes back to what do we do with the programs and the work with the communities. And we also did that. So for example, we have a loan fund. We have 2 loan funds, but we have about $26 million in loan funds that are available, flexible loan funds. It's basically like our own CDFI without the certification. And before we used it for race-neutral innovation and change in communities, including Cleveland. And now we only use it in ways that we believe are going to be closing the racial gaps in income and wealth. We're lending it to entrepreneurs of color who can't get capital. We're lending it to fund managers of color who have hard times getting investors. We're essentially saying we could continue to do the work in a race-neutral way and not be getting close to the root of the problem, or we can actually, now that we see what the issues are, we can change the way that we work. We also, instead of generic professional development for our staff, we actually provide 5 hours of racial equity coaching to our staff. And I got to tell you, it's been the best investment we've ever made, because if you've done this and you've done it well, this is really hard. It's hard for the white people. It's hard for the people of color. It's hard for everybody for different reasons. And the coaching allows you to sit with a coach and say stuff you shouldn't be saying to to your colleagues and friends. But it's very real, and I will tell you this. I had normal turnover for the first 6-7 years that I was running Living Cities, 15-20% a year. My turnover now is almost zero. Almost zero. And it's because people actually are comfortable coming to work. And they're actually bringing their whole selves. People use that phrase, and it's bullshit. It's not. It turns out that if you actually value the lived experience, people value coming to work. And so number one is that. We actually have to put race in the center of your organization. The second one is we have to build new normals that create hope in the face of those brutal facts about racism. But those new normals, and why do we need the new normals? Because if you're actually listening to what you're learning in your racial equity competency building work, what you're realizing is fundamentally the systems that we have, it doesn't matter what they are. That's what this slide is supposed to do. Let me go back to this. So this is actually, if you did the groundwater training, you've seen this slide because I just lifted it from their slides. I do say that it's theirs. But I find this really powerful because it says here, this says death from diabetes, infant death, third grade reading, long-term suspensions, incarceration rate. It goes across a bunch of bad things. And what it shows you is that in every single category, people of color have greater disparities. Every single category. And then you're like, oh, but that's North Carolina, it's the South. But if you do the training, they show you it's every state. It's every state in the union. It's Vermont. You know, it's wherever Nirvana is, Maine, I don't know. It's in every state in the union. And that's why the idea is that this is not just like bad choices being made by bad people. This is like the groundwater is polluted with racism. And so if the groundwater is polluted with racism, then we have to create these new normals that are going to say, okay, we accept that, and we're going to attack the systems head on, and we're going to figure out what actually will get results that will change the trajectory for people of color. And so over the last 11 years, so I have a great job in the sense that, one, I don't have to raise any money because all these folks actually just give us the money for the privilege of joining Living Cities. If you could work that out, do that. After raising money for 25 years, that is one, now I'm going way off script. That is one of the stupidest structures we have in America, where we have the people doing the hardest work, spending like 60-70% of their time raising money, actually not to do the hard work, but to make up something to do next, because no one wants to fund the thing that they actually funded last year. So basically what I get a chance to do is I get a chance to work around the country, go around the country, and I get to watch trends. I basically, that's what I do. That's one thing I'm good at. I'm ADD, so I'm not really good at like staying and doing one thing at a time. But I do love looking across the country and actually seeing trends. And what I saw were some things were started to spread 10, 11 years ago and started to spread everywhere. And some things started 10 or 11 years ago and didn't spread anywhere. And so just stop for a minute and think of in your own mind, like what have you seen in your history that has, like everybody was excited about 10 years ago and didn't go anywhere? And then think about the things that people were excited about 10 years ago and they maybe aren't anymore, but they went everywhere. And so I wrote a book about those things because I actually don't care about the things that were exciting and didn't go anywhere because they're one-offs. And one-offs are good, but they actually don't change systems, and they don't fundamentally address those disparities. And so I went. Do I have? Oh, so there's some. I'm jumping around because I'm excited about what I'm talking about. But and so I'm going to talk about some of those things that I saw that actually get to the root of the problem. But as you go to build the next generation of work, there were 3 things that I said have to be the foundation of it. And I don't want to skip them because I think they're really important. And the first one is that whatever you do, it has to be about people and place. has to be about people and place. And because of the screwy way that we are all funded to do this work, we don't have the ability, generally, to be about people. Let's be honest, we're about place. Right? The fees that we get, which is the only money we can really rely on from deals, makes us focus on place. It's not our fault. It's the system. But it will never be sufficient. It will only be necessary. And we have to figure out, how do we individually and collectively be about people and place? Number two, how do we actually, this is one of my favorite slides. So how do we actually take the institutional and structural racism into account? So in one of the trainings I was at, they talked about this study they did with monopoly boards. Anybody hear this in the training they did? Wasn't this powerful? It's crazy powerful, and it makes all the sense in the world. And this is the example. And again, I take liberties with the facts. Anybody who knows me, my facts are usually 50, 60% right. And the rest is storytelling. But there's a study that they did, and they let all the people of color play Monopoly for 3 hours. And so the board was all full with the hotels and all that kind of stuff. And then they let the white people play. And boy, were they pissed. Because every time the white people landed on one of the squares, they had to pay a ton of money, a tax, because somebody owned all the real estate. Right? And in fact, what one of the people said was, I was really working to end up in jail so then I could get money to get out. Well, that's a freaking metaphor if I ever heard one. And so if we are not, so the idea that, we're post-civil rights, that, we are post-racial, and that everybody's now starting from an equal playing field, ridiculous. We're starting from the monopoly board, and the people, and all of the things are full. The value of properties, home ownership is such a big one. About wealth and the wealth disparities. Redlining is such critical. It's not, most people's wealth in America comes from owning their home. And if you're a person of color, basically, if you don't own a home, you don't have wealth. And it's not that it's the only answer, because it's not, and there's a lot of reasons why today it's even harder than ever. But the wealth of most white people, like, in my standard speech about my new book, I say, I've lived the American dream. My grandparents were immigrants. My father fought in the World War II. He went to college on the GI Bill. He bought a house in suburban New Jersey with FHA financing, right? And it's like, and then what they've done with that equity, and all 3 kids have gone to college, right? That was the white person's opportunity. It's not the opportunity they had because the monopoly board was already set. Number 2, if we don't do our work with that in mind, and you can't be able to bring it back to that, you're not going to be able to make much progress. And then finally, process is the new program, and let me tell you what I mean by that. There's no way that we can do people in place if we're doing it ourselves. You can do transactions by yourself, kind of. I mean, you need all the other players, the money, the architects, the lawyers, all that stuff. But generally speaking, to create the new normals I'm going to talk about, you can't do it yourself. In fact, it's these coalitions of folks who are going to change the systems for permanently. The question is, are you part of those coalitions or are you not? So what are some of those new normals? Nina, how am I doing time-wise, wherever you are? Okay. Joel, thank you. So let me talk about some of these new normals. So every year of education post-high school, studies show, let me see, where is that slide? I want to go to a slide. I'll go back to that. That's my favorite slide, so we'll get back to it. So every year, some college, if you graduate high school, they say your lifetime earnings will be about $1.3 million. Some college after it goes up almost $250,000 every year post high school. And so you would think, if we know ways that are tried and true, not the one-off, if you knew ways that were tried and true that would get kids or adults another year of college, wouldn't you think we'd be doing it everywhere? Right? So when I heard about these early college high schools, which I talk about in my book, and I kind of dug under to find out about them, I actually was pissed. And I still am. Because the bottom line is, so what are they? So in the early 2000s, the Gates Foundation spent gajillion dollars to try to understand how can we make high schools work better. Well, I have to tell you, high schools have worked fine for my kids because it was a waste of, a couple years were a waste, but, they've got all the privilege in the world. They went to great colleges, blah, blah, blah. But for most kids, high schools are horrible. They're not interesting at all. And kids drop out in large part, and this is what the data shows, because it's boring. And they're not engaged and not doing anything they want. So Gates spent a bunch of money, and in a bunch of states, not the big states, not New York, Chicago, San Francisco, not in the coasts. And so I spoke to half a dozen superintendents of schools. Rural Texas, some rural and non-rural Ohio, North Carolina. But I was having dinner with a superintendent in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I said to him, I'm going to ask you two things, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but bear with me. He said, okay. I said, you have early college high schools in your school system. And he looks at me and goes, yes. And I said, and it took you 2.5 years to negotiate it with the local college. And he says, yes. How do you know that? And I said, well, I've talked to superintendents. Turns out, what it takes to create a program where high school kids graduate high school with a high school degree and an associate's degree is a superintendent and a college president agreeing that they're going to make it so. That's all. That's all. And I said, did it cost you more money? No. Now, they have to agree about how the money is going to be spent because we're already spending billions of dollars on high schools and colleges. So there's 280 high schools in America already helped 100,000 kids. That's what I mean by not the one-offs, in 23 states that have already done this. You know how many high schools there are in America? 26,000. How many kids in high school in America? 15 million. So we've shown how to do it, but we're not doing it. And that's really what I found in all of this work in my book, which is this book that you have. It's amazing. And until you write a book, don't talk to me about it. It's not amazing. But what was amazing about doing this work is that I said, okay, well, what is economic mobility really about? And it's really about these things. It's about having more education that will give you more income. My whole book was not like, this is not theory and actually policy. It's all about practice that will actually change the new normal, and we know that's already being done. How do you actually get more income because you have the right education? I mean, how do you have the education to get you more income? How are ways that we're creating more jobs? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. How do we build wealth and make sure that people can build wealth? At least right now, the only primary way people build wealth is still through homeownership. We have to expand that, but that's still the way. How do we actually help people get connected to opportunity? My guess is that wherever you work in Cleveland and the communities you're trying to turn around or help improve, the people who live there don't work there. They work somewhere else, and it's a bear to be able to get wherever the hell they're trying to go. And then finally, the biggest challenge that we face, I think, after doing this work, is that we have to re-knit our social fabric so people give a shit. That's the New Jersey in me, sorry. That basically, we have to re-knit, and hopefully if I have the time, I'll talk about that. We have a long history in America of actually caring about our neighbors and actually being a society that voluntarily comes together for the greater good. And we actually have to re-knit that in our communities, but I've also seen it being re-knit. And so it's new normals in each of these that the book is about. And what I found was that the only barrier in every single example I talk in the book, because when I was done, I actually said, okay, I'm going to read it again, which was really boring. And I'm going to ask myself, do any of these things need a law or a regulation to change to make happen in Cleveland or any place? The answer was no. No. The only thing that has to happen is that those of us in any position that we are in, I'll go back to my circles. Oh, it's so many slides back. Oh, sorry. Every one of us has to fully lean into the agency we have in our role. Whether you're a university president, whether you're a superintendent, whether you're a mayor, whether you're a philanthropist, whether you're an investor, whether you're a citizen. If we simply need to fully maximize the power that we have and don't let anybody tell us we don't have the power until we don't. And that was the most shocking. It was both optimistic but also frustrating because why aren't people doing it? And that's really ultimately the message I'm saying to you today. So you heard about the schools. Let me give you another example about different types of decisions that people can make. So a lot of people, all right. So a lot of people talk about artificial intelligence, robots, and about jobs being destroyed. Well, jobs have always been destroyed in America, and they will always be destroyed. The question is, are we creating jobs? And this slide is the distressing reality that we have stopped creating jobs at dramatically less rates. So 90% of all net new jobs in America come from companies less than 5 years old. Okay? And so if we don't have companies new and less than 5 years old, we're not creating net new jobs. Everybody with me? And so, and interestingly, but not surprisingly, in 1996, 77% of all startups were from white people. And in 2015, it was down to 60%, and now we're in the 50s. And so so you're like, well, why are white people not making startup anymore? And like, well, but these folks are increasing. Latinos have doubled in that time period. Well, they've doubled from 20 to 40, not from 2,000 to 6,000 startups. The reality is, why don't Latinos and blacks and other non-whites start companies? Anybody? How do you start a company in America? Money! And so the disparities, if you're making 59 cents as a black man to $1 as a white man in income, and you have a dime as a black or a Latino family in wealth to $1.10 in wealth, it's not surprising that you don't have the friends and family to be able to start a company. And so the new normal is, how do we actually create a capital system that has different people making the choices and that has capital being able to go to be able to fill we can't have companies be started with friends and family money anymore. It's got to come from somewhere else. It's not a good or bad thing, it's a new normal. And so what's exciting is there's more than 300, now what's the number? I am going to try to give you some facts. There's $300 million. There's $300 million that's already been invested in 30 black and brown owned funds and firms. Okay, so you're like, it's a good start. $300 million, 30 black owned firms. Anybody know how many venture capital firms there are in America? 800. Right, so we're like, we're a blip. And the bottom line is that we need a new normal for how capital can fuel American capitalism for a new majority. That's what we have to do. We actually know how to do it. We have $300 million going into 30 funds. It's just not enough. And it just has to be the new normal. Last one, I'm sure I'm running out of time. Am I okay? Yeah, sure. All right. I'm having fun. I don't know about you guys. I did come kind of a long way. Am I done? Am I almost done? A couple more minutes. Okay. So I'll give you one more example, and then I got to get to the third thing. So transportation. So there's been a lot of studies, and the one that I focus on in Minneapolis, people of color spend 160 hours a year getting to work and back. That's 4 weeks of work that they don't get paid for, right? And so, there's examples in the book about now, but now there's 64% of Americans have a smartphone. And we know that the smartphone and the art of transportation right now is the smartphone's two-way ability to communicate with folks. Where are you? Where do you want to go? And so there are jurisdictions already that are saying, okay, we've had these bus lines that we had to keep in these neighborhoods that no one takes the bus, but we can't politically stop the bus line. They actually stopped the bus line, and they put money into actually what would solve the problem. They didn't save money, but they created equivalent of giving people subsidies for Uber and Lyft to be able to solve the first mile and the last mile problem. And then they started to do it for the midnight to 6 p.m. shift. The bottom line is these are new normals, and the person I highlight in there, the head of the transit agency in Tampa Bay, says, I don't operate bus lines. I am a transportation orchestrator. My job is to orchestrate people being able to get around. Okay, third thing. What's the third part of this next generation? I had all these great ideas. I ran out of time. Challenges ahead. So this is what I think you have to challenge yourself with. 1, can you actually lead on race? Can you change the way you work and have your work be as close to the root cause of the problem? Number 1. Number 2, can you really move beyond the built environment to the person? Number 3, can you fully lean into your own agency and power to influence those 5 things that I showed you on there? Can you crack the code on regional opportunity? And finally, can you make the government be a disproportionately positive force in the change? And when you read the book, and I'm sure you will, but when you read the book, ask yourself, why aren't these in Cleveland? Why? None of the examples I gave you here are in Cleveland, but actually some of them are right next door. Why aren't they? And the question may not be, what do I have to do at Union Miles to get them here? The question into Union Miles, the question is, what do I, as Union Miles, have to do to make sure everybody else does what they have to do to make that so my people get these access to this? So ultimately, here. So did anybody see Hamilton when it was here? Right? So I heard yesterday that Hamilton was here, so I had to put this in here. But there's one of my favorite songs in there is like where he says, I'm not going to throw away my shot. Right? That's what I'm challenging you all. It's like you are in a position here in Cleveland. You have an incredible legacy of change. You've not only led Cleveland, but you've led the nation. You need to lead us into this next generation. And it's personal. It's like you have to wake up every day and say, I'm not going to throw away my shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I think we can all agree that we certainly have started our day by being inspired. We do have time for maybe 2 to 3 questions. Microphones are in the back. First raise their hands, first gets to ask. Come on. Right over here.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Hecht, did you bring the book?
Yeah, they're in the back, I think.
It's in your bag.
They're in the bag. I thought somebody at least would challenge my 4 people I put up on the slide initially.
It's not a question, just a point of clarity. We do have early college in Cleveland. One is right around the corner.
Good. But it's not everywhere, right? It's like the one-off. That's it. I was trying to be provocative and piss people off, and it didn't work.
Good morning.
Good morning.
To what do you attribute the willingness to participate in these barrier-breaking activities geographically?
Say again, I'm sorry, I missed that.
You said that in Cleveland there's 2,400 people willing to
Yeah.
engage. And to what do you attribute that geographically, that there's more involvement here than anywhere else or everywhere else you may have been?
Because you took that first step. I mean, the reality is, and again, I speak as a white man. I can't speak for all white people, but I can speak for a white man. Is that if you are in a position of power, and I give Joel credit for this as the head of a Neighborhood Progress and being the host of the Year of Awareness, it's like you have to take that first step. And when you take that first step, it liberates people to do what they would want to do, but they're afraid. Right? Like race is the third rail. And you're afraid you're going to say something wrong, you're going to offend someone, and you will do all of that. But that's all part of the change. And so Cleveland's such a good example, which is why I talk about it when I'm going around the country, is that when you opened the door, people ran through. They ran through. It's step one. You're not done. But 2,400 people, you can change Cleveland with 2,400 people. I honestly believe that. I honestly believe that. And the question is, what do you do in this next generation to harness that?
Can I just shout out? Sure. Okay. So Ben, when you got to the picture of people
Yeah.
In the middle of the five
Yeah.
things to focus on, you said, we have a history of being neighborly, and I could talk more, but I don't have time now. I think it ties to the 2,400 people. So,
Yeah.
So what would you say about what has been...
This one?
No.
Oh.
No, you just passed.
Okay.
In the middle. You made the point that you could...
Oh, in the middle, yeah.
Yeah, you could say more about
Oh,
the
yeah.
ways we have been
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
at being neighborly.
Yeah. So I'm sure I'm sure I don't have time to. So our history is actually quite fascinating. So de Tocqueville came here in the 1800s, right? And he walked away with a bunch of conclusions. One of them was, what's amazing about the American spirit is people love to voluntarily come together. They have these voluntary associations where they help each other. 100 years later, another sociologist, Gunnar Myrdal, came. And he found the same thing in the 1930s. Same thing, except he said it's really hard to reconcile that history of caring about your neighbors and the stain of slavery and racism. They don't seem to go together, and it is literally, it remains a stain on the soul of the nation that they have to address, right? But then in Bowling Alone, anybody read Putnam's book a bunch of years ago? Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, was essentially around 1970s, 80s. That stopped. And people started bowling alone. They weren't joining the bowling league and the civic associations. And so we've had this steady drop-off. And what's happening when I talk about the book are ways that that's changing. And part of the way it's changing, and part of the people who are changing it, is actually local government. And I talk about that a lot. I don't know that it's happening here. I don't think it is. Not as well as I see happening elsewhere, but it's been this really kind of a change where local government has become this place that people have confidence in, that people are going and actually working, showing that it actually works. People are volunteering to improve the way government works. And the thing that I didn't talk about, but I really think is so perfect for Cleveland in the book, you read about the boards and commissions leadership institutes. Because what these are is essentially the city governments, including the councilmen, they appoint people to boards and commissions, right? Those are real power. Those are real power. Zoning commission, human rights commissions, all those things. And so in over a dozen places around the country, they're training their leaders. They're selecting leaders from the community. They're training them to sit on boards and commissions. And then the politicians are appointing them to boards and commissions to be the future leaders. And one of my favorite stories is Ilhan Omar, who, this is her, she's about to be a member of Congress. She'll be the first Somali Muslim woman member of Congress. She started on a board and commission appointment from the local program in Minneapolis. And I talked to a dozen graduates of those programs, and it's something we control. So I won't pick on the councilman. I don't know how you appoint boards and commissions here. Oftentimes it's the mayor's office. And so you can appoint them to the person who gave them the most money, or you can appoint them to the people who are your future leaders. Well, those are the choices you're making, right? And the places are choosing the future leaders. And of the dozen people I talked to people from Oakland and from Minneapolis, two of those programs, a third of them had run for political office. right? That's a future of our democracy. And we control it if we actually stand up and say that's what has to happen.
Yeah, Ben, I really would like for you to highlight again this whole discussion on. Thank you. I really would want you to further highlight this whole discussion of really having this discussion of race and racism.
Yeah.
Again, as you said, black folks, we talk about it all the
Yeah.
time. But it really is important. And again, the training that we've gone through, and certainly I went through, it made me understand that we here in the nation, we have to have this conversation on race.
Yeah.
Well, you can't have the conversation without a common language.
Right.
And that really has to be stressed, and I would say highly among white folks.
Yes,
That,
for sure.
You know, because I want to talk about it to
Right,
you.
right.
But when I start talking about it and you start frowning up, I understand you really don't understand. So
That's right.
I'm and so that point has to be driven home. You can't have this conversation until you really educate, and it takes more than really just the one in it.
No, it does.
I mean,
It does.
it's a full study.
No, it totally does. And if
So-
you want to be a leader, right, and especially as a white person, if I want to be a leader and change and help be an ally in this change, I got to know a ton of stuff, right? I don't have any natural cultural competency to do this work. And actually, when it started, when Nadia Awusu, if any of you know Nadia, when she came to me, 7 years ago, I was scared. I was scared because I didn't know what to do. And I didn't have, and I thought it was going to blow up, right? I mean, it's normal. You don't have any competency. If someone says, you have cancer, you're like, oh shit, what do I do? I don't know how to treat cancer. It's the same thing. I'm not equating it to cancer, although it is. So I had to, as a person, I had to really understand the issues, And then once I did, I really was comfortable. I grieve over it. I'm saddened by it. I'm mad about it, but I'm not paralyzed by it. And so what I do instead, I put all my energy into saying, okay, I'm done being race neutral in my work. And so when, and I got to tell you, I don't get invited to conferences I used to get invited to. I don't get invited to dinner parties that I used to get invited to, and I'm okay with that. And I would say my biggest regret is that I didn't know this 25 years ago. It's my biggest regret. And so now I'm sprinting to try to catch up. And that's too bad. But all of you are not as old as I am. And you start now, and you sprint, and we have a shot at doing something meaningful. But I totally agree with you. The training is critical, though. It is a common language. But once you have that common language, what's amazing, I talk about the turnover rate. We have these conversations in the office, and I actually call it liberating. Initially, white people are really afraid of certain words in this work. One is race, one's racism, racist, white supremacy, white fragility, white privilege, all this. You're like, I hate all those words, but they are true. And so once you actually get over the fact that they do hurt, you're like, okay, so a lot of shit hurts, and you know what? That it's painful. It's painful for white people, but I don't live it every day. That's the part that is so important. It's like you have to be able to hold two things. That you can understand what the issues are. You can figure out in your role how do you become an effective ally. But you also have to understand that I don't get stopped walking down the street. I don't get stopped riding in my car. I don't get stopped grilling at the park. I mean, it is stuff that, you just, and you get comfortable with the language. You can then have these conversations. That's why 2,400 people who have the same language is amazing. What you do with it is the question. But I will say, those 2,400 people can change Cleveland. I really believe it. The question is, what's your role in directly and indirectly making that happen? Thank you.